You do have a BVD problem on your farm. I made this video to work with you to overcome this problem because BVD can have a huge impact and incur great losses on the farm. First off, let's put the losses into perspective to get a picture of just how important it is to bring BVD under control. Bovine viral diarrhea or BVD is a misleading name because the losses are more due to reproductive and immune suppressive effects rather than the gastrointestinal system itself. The reproductive effects BVD can have are such as abortions, embryo losses, increased returns to service, increased calving to conception interval, increased services per conception, as well as poor quality semen from infected bulls, and many others. The immune suppressive effects it can have are it makes cows more susceptible to other diseases, as well as decreasing milk production. The BVD Steering Committee has estimated that losses for a dairy farmer are about $220 per cow and $70,000 annually for an average-sized herd. The BVD Steering Committee have outlined a protocol to follow that can be found on the Control BVD website, and they have also put out resources specifically for farmers, which I strongly urge you to take a look at. It is a well-designed and organized protocol, and as such, I will be following the 4-step process they have outlined in the BVD Management Toolkit, namely define, assess, action, and monitor. Let's first define the BVD status of your herd. The SP ratio is the measure of antibodies produced to fight the BVD virus. The higher the SP ratio, the more antibodies are present in the bulk milk tank, indicating the higher the level of BVD exposure to the herd being tested. The SP ratio of your milking herd has consistently been above 0.75 over the past 2 years. It has been moderate to high from 2009 to the beginning of 2011, Then, from the second half of 2011 onwards, the results have been consistently above 1.0, which indicates a very high exposure. A very high exposure means that you very likely have a current active infection within the milking herd. The graph shows that the high levels are consistent and each high result was not a one-off event. This suggests that there is a persistently infected animal somewhere on the farm that is constantly exposing the herd to the virus. Otherwise, if they were not being constantly exposed or if the PI had been removed, the antibody levels would have fallen back down. Your BVD PCR results, however, have been consistently negative. This PCR test is very sensitive. It can detect virus from a single PI in any sized herd. These results suggest that there is no PI within your milking herd. Do you have any record of the cows that were not milked into the vet on the day of testing? Unless your answer is yes, the source of infection is coming from a PI that is outside the milking herd. This could be one of the bulls, beef cows you may be grazing, young calves, or even the neighbor's cattle. This brings us to the next step, assessing the biosecurity of your farm. Assessing the biosecurity is necessary to identify the gaps in the system where BVD can be introduced onto the farm, especially during risk periods such as during the first 4 months of pregnancy when PI calves are formed. There are risk assessment questionnaires from the Management Toolkit which I will go through with you on my upcoming farm visit. But for now, let me just give you an idea of what areas to think about in terms of biosecurity. You need to keep in mind all groups of cattle you have on the farm when thinking about these questions, including bulls, heifers, and even the fetuses carried by pregnant animals. It is helpful to think along the lines of animals coming into the farm, animals going out and returning later when pregnant, as well as over the fence contact. Let's look at in first. Do you test all brought-in animals to identify PIs? Also, think about people, vehicles, equipments, etc. that come onto the farm, as they can potentially bring in the infection with them. Looking at animals going out, do you send any heifers or cows off the farm during the first 120 days of pregnancy? Have they been vaccinated at the appropriate time? And so on. Preventing the birth or importation of PIs is so important because they are the main source of infection to a herd, as PIs shed lots of virus for a long period of time. Transiently infected cattle can spread infection too, but they do not have as much of an impact since they only shed the virus for a short period. Moving on to over. Do your neighbors have any type of cattle on their property? Is nose-to-nose contact possible between your stock and theirs? Think also about vaccinations. Are your cows fully vaccinated before mating? Do you vaccinate them before leaving your property? Think about these questions and I'll go over them with you when I come to your farm next. Moving on to the next step, action. There are 3 main steps you can perform to reduce the prevalence of BVD on your farm. They are testing for PIs and culling them, vaccinating your animals, and management. How many of these steps you want to implement is up to you, but since you have quite a bad case of it on your farm, I strongly recommend you to try and do them all initially, especially focusing on testing and culling. The BVD vaccine is not effective on PIs, so vaccination should be done together with testing and culling to get rid of PIs on your farm. Let's look at the first one, testing and culling. As mentioned earlier, the results are fairly conclusive that you do not have a PI in your milking herd. But to confirm this, I would like you to please check whether any cows were not milked into the vat on the days of testing. If yes, we will have to test them individually. So, assuming you do not have a PI in your milking herd, we do not need to test the milking herd. We do, however, need to screen the non-milking herd, including bulls, brought-in cows, calves more than 35 days old. By the way, they should be more than 35 days old since before this period, maternal antibodies can interfere with the testing. Finally, you should also test any miscellaneous cattle you have on your property, and these may be steers, bull calves, cattle you're grazing for friends or family, and so on. So how do you test them? I recommend you to do direct testing. You can either do it by taking blood samples or ear notch samples. Then you can either request it to be tested by PCR or ELISA. But if you get a positive result, you must repeat the test, because if it's a positive followed by a negative, the animal is a TI. If it's a positive the second time around, this indicates she's a PI, and then you can cull her. The second option is vaccination. Vaccination needs to be implemented, especially if there's a group where the risk of exposure just cannot be reduced, such as cows going off the farm to graze. So who and when should you vaccinate? You should vaccinate both bulls and cows before mating. Also, vaccinate cattle before they leave the farm, and vaccinate them off the farm too if they are going to get pregnant there. Also, vaccinate any brought-in animals, especially if you do not know their BVD status. After you have brought BVD under control on your farm, you could just maintain annual vaccination regimes if you do not want to test all keeper calves, though doing both is still the gold standard. Don't forget to record after every vaccination so you can keep track of the BVD status of your herd. Moving on to management. This step revolves around improving biosecurity, and as such, the actions you implement will depend on which areas of biosecurity are lacking. Some steps you could implement to take action against BVD are such as cull or euthanize calves as soon as possible after birth if you're not going to test them. You should also calve bought-in cows separate to the present milking mob. Try not to keep calves from cows that were grazed off during the first 4 months of pregnancy. Also, try to prevent direct contact with neighboring cattle by planting hedges, double fencing, or coordinating with them to ensure that both your stock are never in adjacent paddocks. If you share equipment with your neighbors, make sure to clean the equipment properly. Last but not least is monitor. You should monitor the progress of BVD on your farm to catch it early before it has a chance to have a huge impact and to prevent the risk of reintroduction. There are 2 methods to do this. Firstly, bulk tank milk antibody testing, which you are already doing, so keep it up. Ideally, this should be performed in mid-spring when most cows are in milk. Any significant increase in SP ratio needs to be investigated and the appropriate measures put in place. Keep in mind that recent vaccinations can increase the SP ratio temporarily. Another option for monitoring is direct testing your young calves by taking skin or serum samples. It is better to screen at a young age rather than wait till they enter the milking herd. All replacement calves must be tested before leaving the calf rearing shed. Don't wait till they get to the paddocks where they can potentially infect the other stock. This option is more expensive, so if cost is an issue, I recommend you do the first option. That's all I have to say for now. I will visit you soon to investigate this in more detail. In the meantime, click here to have a look at the Control BVD website for more information, and do not hesitate to call me if you have any questions at all. Have a great day.